When you think of what Indian Trail is now, it wasn't even close 30 years ago. It was just beginning to form together. Indian Trail started in 1993. It started out of Northview Bible Church. There was a number of families that were a part of Northview who were living in and around the Indian Trail area, and they were driving over to Northview. Northview leadership knew that, and so they held a meeting asking who would be interested in joining with a church, starting a church. So here was a neighborhood with a vacant church building and a lot of faithful believers from Northview Bible Church. A lot of families were out knocking on doors, canvassing the neighborhood, bringing people bread, and we're starting a church. I think the first Sunday there was over 250 people here because everybody was out inviting the whole neighborhood, and so just an awesome start to the work here. The pastor who was at Northview, Ron Miller, would preach a service at Northview, drive over here, preach here, drive back up to Northview and do that other service. And that was sort of the agreement for 1 year. So the people who started this church knew that after that year they needed to find a pastor. Right around the beginning of '95, they hired a guy from the West Side. Then they hired a pastor named Ron Johnson. So that would have been right around '97 to 2002.
There was so many things about the church that just felt right to us. And just the welcomeness from the people we met when we came in, it was inviting. It felt good and it was close, and that was really important to us, to have a church that we're not driving 10 miles to, right? Because we know that you need to be part of the body, in a sense, there locally. It wasn't long till it started seeming like something's not right. The things I was starting to see is in the parking lot, there would be a group over here and a group over here talking. There's this visible divide of what the body's looking like. It's almost like becoming two different entities. Something was broken. It was a real sense of division going on. So it was 3 elders on the one side of the equation, 3 elders on the other side of the equation, is when it kind of exploded one day here in church, and everyone's standing around shell shocked, like, what is going on? Is 3 of the elders literally left the church and took all those connections they had with them, and the other 3 elders stayed here. There was this shell shock season for our church. And that was the beginning of God doing some changes in this body of Indian Trail Church. But he was clearly moving to do something. I think he was just opening it up, to do what he's going to do and grow what he's going to grow. And the moment you can't see that, you can't say, oh, I'm so excited to see what he's up to. I'm so looking forward to this. It's just like, what is going on? And I was asked to actually join the pastoral search committee. We were given cassette tapes. This dates a little bit, right? And so there would be a stack of cassette tapes, and this group of men that were sitting around trying to discern God's will and all this would end up with a cassette tape. So you would listen to your tape and come back with your feedback. And so I listened to a tape, and the guy's name was Matt Boswell. And I thought, there might be something here. So when I reported back, that tape got passed around, and then the interview process started, and that's how we ended up getting a relationship with Beacon Bible, and the process of bringing not a pastor over, but a pastor in the church body.
God impressed on us that what we knew as Beacon was going to be different. Not when, not how, not why, but it was going to be different. So we spent a year and a half trying to get people comfortable with the idea that something was going to change. No one guessed that we might merge with another church. Beacon had 3 pastors in its 30-year history or 40-year history. Matt Boswell was one of those, was one of the guest pastors here at one time. Did a 3-week series. And shortly thereafter, we got a call from the elders at Indian Trail wanting to know if they could talk to Matt about coming over here. Well, that was kind of a shock, because what do you do with the rest of us? So we said, no, you can't talk to him about coming over here. But God worked in the hearts of people within the leadership and the people that said, well, maybe this is what God had planned. When God saved his people from Egypt, and he took them out to the Jordan River, and he told them to go across the Jordan River, they sent spies into the land. We sent spies into the land. And we sent a couple delegations supposedly over here to see what was going on. We found no giants here. And we found a lot of people that wanted to worship God. Both congregations, both elderships felt that this was part of God's plan, so get ready. Just start to follow.
Beacon Bible Chapel comes over. Indian Trail Community Church is now probably double the size. I know even by the time I got here, there was still a sense of, or a consciousness of, oh, those are Beacon people, those are Indian Trail people.
There was definitely an awareness that, oh, you came over with Beacon in the conversation, right? And so there was definitely a recognition of there's those who've suffered it, the hardship, and those who've come in as part of God's plan to heal it. But it was not long before we recognized about a third of the church is the old Indian Trail Community Church, and about a third of the church is Beacon Bible Church, and about a third of the church are people who are coming in and saying, what's going on over here? This is kind of cool. And that, I think when that happened, there was this real sense of, we're none of the above anymore. Yeah. We're something different. And that was a really cool time.
At the time, we did merge, but one of the things we thought would be a good idea is the elders of both churches had a spot on Sunday morning that they would do communion or do a little sermonette. So we would get up. We thought, well, it'd be a good idea for the Indian Trail people to get to know the Beacon Bible leadership and vice versa. So we'd stand up there. And it was my turn one time. I started off with a sermon on a little known Greek word called demonos. And I remember Matt Boswell just about freaked out because he studied a little bit of Greek. And demonos, if you literally translate it, it is them and us. It's a Greek word because I'm Greek and I said it and I made it up. My passion was, and I thought God would eventually work, is that them and us would become we. Pretty soon it was more of an us, and today it is definitely an us.
The next few years, you have a growing and changing community here. So Pastor Matt is here. About a year later, I think he brings Corey Gage on to come up to start doing youth ministry and some associate work.
God doesn't bring in new leadership because he wants more of the same. He wants something different. And the things that came with Corey, the way he thinks, the way he analyzes, things just changed dramatically. We went from sterile walls, everywhere was a white wall, can't decorate, and Corey's like, no. And so all the paintings on the walls, and Corey just helped change the climate of this church.
During my time at Faith Bible Church, one of the interns that I got to work many years with, his name was Matt Boswell. We would have lunch together about once every 3 to 6 months. We would stay in touch, just find out how each other was doing, what was going on. I became aware that Beacon Bible Church was in talks with potentially merging with Indian Trail Church. I had been a pastor at Valley Fourth Memorial Church for approximately 6 years, and I got a phone call. And the phone call was from Matt Boswell. And Matt did some small talk at first, and he said, I have a really odd question to ask you. Okay. He goes, would you consider coming and being a pastor at Indian Trail Church? There was an excitement and a joy, this new venture with a friend as we had this church, and there was a camaraderie of, wow, new things that have never been done before, and God is working, and let's see what he does and how he uses us.
The fact is that if you back up and if you don't have that split, you don't have Matt coming, you don't have Corey coming. So you kind of look at how the Lord used these dominoes, and some of them negative, but as we know, he's always working his purposes behind these things.
I remember it was going to be an elder meeting. I called Matt and I said, Matt, I've got something else to do. And he said, you might want to be here tonight. I said, I can't be there. I said, I'm turning in my resignation. Well, now what are we going to do? About a week later, had these two guys come into the elder meeting, Corey and Kyle, and proposed something that was to us even more radical than hiring Matt Boswell. We think it'd be a good idea for us to co-pastor this church.
We'd talked about having what we'd call co-pastorship. We are the pastors here that are called to shepherd the church, and we will serve in our areas of giftedness and serve in the area of need at that given time. So that was a little bit fluid that we looked going forward. What could that mean? We were both excited about the idea. We had no idea what the elders would think as a whole. So we went to the next elder meeting and told them that we thought we'd come up with a plan, laid out the plan to them, and it was just very sweet to see how God had been working.
And I remember when they first proposed it, I said, this is one of those elder meetings that's going to last about 6 months. But, as we start and try to discuss every angle. And what was it, Jim, an hour? God worked his Spirit in unanimously that very night, a bunch of men who came in with no idea all of a sudden had God's plan. We said, that's a good plan.
There was, during that transition, even though the Lord gave you some unanimity and some conviction about what to do, it didn't make it easy for the congregation because they were expecting more of a traditional transition. We're going to go through a period of searching for all these pastors. That first year in 2007, I came on, Corey was here, Matt was here. We go through about 10 months of that, and I was just feeling in my soul like a restlessness, like I don't think God's created me to do what I'm doing at this church. And so my wife and I began to talk and pray, and I remember I came to a point where the tug in my soul was, am I built to proclaim God's word? And I was upstairs in my office and I said, okay, Lord, I'm gonna set my face to pray about this, like really go after you, seek your will for my life. Day one of my setting my face to really pray. I go from my office to pray, get done praying, get up. Matt knocks on my door, comes in and says, hey, just wanna let you know I'm leaving. And my prayers had been, Lord, do I look for a job somewhere else? Am I supposed to plant a church? Like, I don't even know what this means. I had no idea. And he said that, and then he walked out. And when he walked out, it was almost like an audible voice that said, it's here. And I knew I would do what God called me to do, but it was gonna be right here. It was also a beginning of playing out a conviction that we held very strongly and grew over the years of a true plurality of elders. So it wasn't so much like this new, we're pioneering a co-pastorate. It was, no, we're going to keep working as a plurality of elders who exercise their gifts differently. And so that's what we did. And it seemed really natural to us, but it became really fruitful those next few years. The gospel is the good news that God has an elect people that he so loved that even in their fallenness, he sent his son to die in their stead that he might justify them, eternally reconcile them to himself, and raise them with Christ into an everlasting kingdom. Most of my Christian life, I thought the gospel was really that thing you believe that sort of like punches your ticket from hell to heaven, like I cross all over this line. And God just absolutely tore that apart. I think it was 2009, and I was going to Western Seminary, and I would go down for intensive classes because we were all pastors in ministry. So we'd go for a week and meet and have a class. And I went down for a preaching class, and I thought it would be about technique. And I went down, and it wasn't about technique at all. It was days of us walking through the scriptures saying, not how should you preach, but whom should you preach?
We as a church began to see not just all the prophecies about Christ, it's not all the promises of things that would happen, but actually how Christ was in everything, how it was all foreshadowing, how it was all a picture. And that was just a growing time that was amazing.
Coming in 2015, I think I was seeing the fruit of several years of a church that was very nourished in the centrality of Christ. And I think one of the things that was a joy for me is then all I was trying to do is just trying to pair up what you were doing in the pulpit with our singing and have that same content and focus be very Christocentric, very much focused on the gospel, that storyline that we are desperate sinners in need of Christ's grace. And actually the fruit of that is singing and praising and proclaiming, because that word of Christ is dwelling richly in us. And then we're admonishing, teaching one another, singing psalms, hymns, spiritual songs with thankfulness in our hearts to God, it says in Colossians 3 there.
In those days, we had Moody Bible Institute, which was going really strong at that time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of kids, and a lot of them wanting to pursue pastoral ministry. And so it was just this natural connection to where like Dan Du Bois, Justin Ridgway came in early on, and a bunch of guys after that. But then it actually morphed. It became an internship and a residency. And that happened because of one particular person.
One guy.
You remember?
Mm-hmm. Roloff.
Yeah.
I think it was me. I got a phone call, and it was Mark Roloffs, and he's calling from Minot, North Dakota. And he was in his late 30s, I think, and a pastor of a church over in North Dakota. And he had heard that we had a internship ministry where we were training men for ministry, that particularly from the standpoint of preaching Christ in all the scriptures. He was gonna move his family all the way over here, apply for the internship, and actually I think he had already started to move before we even made a decision about an internship. And his perspective was, I just want to be in this church, and doesn't matter how this turns out, I'm gonna come and learn and grow on pastoral ministry, you know.
I think it was a few months in that we started talking about this idea of a pastoral residency, where the internship was, you know, you're with us for 10, 15 hours a week, you're paid sort of like just a part-time side job so that you can get some experience in ministry, be exposed to ministry. And this residency idea with Roloffs, because he had so much pastoral experience, the idea was, could we essentially create a space for a guy to work with us full-time on pastoral staff, though he wasn't one of our pastors, but he would function with us, and for a couple of years just be in the mix before we sent him out. And that was kind of the first, because we saw Mark's gifts, and we said, man, we want to utilize him and train him the best that we can.
Yeah. And we've had a number of pastoral residents. So Mark
Roloffs.
Matt Jolly,
who's at Mountain Springs up in Bonners Ferry. Well, Will Barkley actually came back and was a resident with us. And then we hired him on staff as a pastor after that. Matthew Abate, who ended up going to Connection Point here in town.
and a couple names I don't know if people will be familiar with, but Dustin Greenup and Aaron Badley.
And I think our body just was like, we want to serve and we want to love, and hopefully we can send out. And some of that I think had to do with, we struggled for many years with missionaries, you know, to see people raised up and then sent out. And, you know, for lack of better terms, starting domestically, I think helped our body to just say, hey, we can actually love on people and watch them grow and then send them out. And so I think our body was ready and hungry for that. It just maybe didn't start with foreign missions. It started with domestic. So it was September of 2016, going back to a conference back at Capitol Hill Baptist Church called a Weekender. So 9 Marks of a Healthy Church, a whole spectrum of what their elders do, what their church life is. We just got a whole different picture, like live picture of the body engaging with each other.
I think what was interesting is going and actually seeing their church theology in practice. It's one thing to read it in books and also to read it in your Bible, but then to see it modeled for you. I think there were a couple concepts in there that were modeled for me at that conference that I had never seen quite that way. And one was this whole idea called church membership.
And so we came home, and my very firm conviction was that if the scriptures said this, then we will see it everywhere. And so we just started reading through the New Testament together as elders for a few months, I think. And we were asking the question all the way through, what do we see about God's people together? What do we see about the church? Just everything we can find. And every week we'd get together and talk about what we were seeing. And that was the real beginning, the transformation, because it all began to crystallize. This idea that God pours the gospel into a people, it transforms them, and because they're transformed, they begin loving one another well and functioning as a body. Even membership, that word, that everybody tripped over, but it's really like you're a member of Christ and of his people. And it's not about the process, it's not about the paperwork, it's about, do you want to look at brothers and sisters in the eye and say, I want to walk with Christ with you and for you?
It's the difference of having staff running things for the church and then having people come and have something put on for them. And what the push from the elders was, we want members serving and ministering. We see biblically the members, the elders and teachers are to help equip and to, yes, help build up, but it's really the members that are helping each other build up into maturity. And so we pressed our folks quite a bit to say, staff will help do the things that we're called to do as a body as a whole and what we think are good for the body as a whole. But you as a member, as a faithful brother and sister, if you have a desire to serve the body, to grow up or to do a ministry, to serve in a certain way, go ahead. So again, back in the day, Jim, you would tell the story of, you're dismissed and then everyone's gone, parking lot's vacant, and now you walk around and for an hour after service, people are still not just hanging out, but they're praying with each other, encouraging each other. At the end of the day, if they have a burden to serve and to love and build others up in the gospel, they don't need our permission to go and make disciples.
When we began to grow in our convictions about what the Bible calls a body to and how they want them to interact, one of the things that was closely connected to that discussion was that we are in two services. We increasingly felt burdened that was not where the Lord would have us. It wasn't serving what we were trying to build in the community of our church family. And so we had that discussion for a long time. What would we do? How would we get to one service? Then COVID happened, and when things started coming back, I remember it was spring, and we talked as elders, and someone suggested that for the summer of 2021, just for the summer, we can actually, numbers-wise, fit in one service. And so that meeting went on, we debated and things like that. And then somebody said, so in the fall, are we gonna go back to 2? And we all looked at each other and essentially said no. And it became really clear that what we were talking about that night was actually just a drastic decision to put our body together. And that happened in July of 2021.
So with 2 services, you had to get people in and out. But now people can hang out, they can fellowship, they can really take as long as they want, with each other to actually get here beforehand, worship together, and then stay in fellowship together and encourage and weep and rejoice together.
The only thing that remain constant are the changes. God doesn't change. He is always faithful. And so the next 30 years, as the next group of people sit here, they're going to talk about all the things that God did that nobody anticipated and all the resources that he provided that nobody knew he could. Because he's God, and we follow a big God. It's going to be exciting, not necessarily without hardships. But if I had to tell my grandson what to expect. So just expect God to do some pretty wonderful things and try to be obedient to him.
Without you people faithfully serving, committing, we wouldn't be here. So the history of ITC is actually every body part that God has brought and those body parts functioning. And so I would hope and encourage 30 more years. Why has God brought you here? What is the part that you are to play? And do that to God's glory.
Two things come to mind when I think about like the state of our body right now. One is our young people. This is really the result of a lot of labor. I think of Laura's work, Dustin, these recent years. And I just see our young people wrapping their arms around the church and understanding what it is to function like a church. And I mean, I think we're gonna see amazing things come out of these, what we say right now are kids. They might be 12 or 16 or 17, and you're gonna see them leading churches and ministries, and I just have so much confidence.
Something we're mindful of is it's not Laura's responsibility or Dawson's responsibility to teach these children rightly. It's the parents stepping up, and we see such an abundance of that because they understand the gospel. They're understanding what we're called to as members of this body, and they're understanding their role as parents in these kids' lives, and they're not getting it for 1 hour on Sunday. They're living it in their households. So I'm thankful that this body has seen that kind of health. These families are experiencing the fruit of that.
And I'm so thankful over the years for a spirit of graciousness in our church that by God's grace has never left. It is really easy for graciousness and kindness to leave a church. How can we be prideful and ungracious when we realize what Christ has given to us? And so I think that just continues to take us back. And so when I watch our church interacting on Sunday mornings throughout the week, even with us as leaders, that has been just a joy to my soul. And I just pray that it's something that God just keeps in us.
God has put churches across the city, across this state, across this country, and around the world as outposts of his kingdom to advance his kingdom, to go against the strongholds. It's a spiritual battle of the enemy. And so each church, God is calling to do specific things. And so as I look at what Indian Trail Church is doing, whether it be planting, equipping, or providing for truly healthy churches, I look forward to seeing ITC's role and part in that.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is how we need to not get our foot off the gas pedal when it comes to the Great Commission. Who we're called to be as followers of Christ. We're called to be fishers of men. Everything
that we've been doing over the last 15 years is to get ready to say, hey, we want to reproduce, and we do that with biblically healthy churches. And so, you know, we just got to continue to prepare. We got our folks and yeah, just be humble and wise and courageous and bold to take the gospel. And it's exciting. And I think our people are ready on that path to do that and be obedient to that. So
much of what we've talked about over the past 30 years were things that we never would have understood what God was doing, whether it was the way the church started, or a split which leads to a merge, or one person coming which leads to others coming, classes and all these things colliding. There is something profound about how God works, and yet there's meaning in our planning. You know, we meant to start an internship program that God has used. We meant to begin partnering with other churches. And so it's this perfect wedding of our planning, but under God's sovereign hand. And, you know, as I think about our plans going forward, there are things that we do want to grow in. You know, Bob, you mentioned planting churches. We want to continue to train pastors and send them out. but we want our people to grow in their capacity to be a part of a church or a new church that may begin, or to go into ministries in the city for the sake of preaching the gospel, works of compassion, things like that. And we want to continue to be a resource to other churches, which by His grace we've had a place in for these last 10 or 12 years. So there are amazing things that God has put on our hearts, and then we just sort of open-handedly pursue them, and God will do what God always does. And I take great comfort in the fact that when a church is gathered around the true gospel with an open Bible in front of them, that is the means by which Christ will build His church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it.